Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. The Harry Potter films left a strong visual impression and, for the most part, respectfully transferred the plot to the screen. But even the best adaptations inevitably lose something, and sometimes scenes are cut that make fans throw up their hands in frustration. It's especially painful when those moments were crucial to character development or the atmosphere of the magical world. Yes, the books are 7 captivating volumes, while the films number only 8. And while moviegoers don't have time for every detail, some omissions are felt particularly deeply. Today I'll walk you through the most puzzling and heartbreaking scenes that were left out of the movies. Then let's dive in. Number 1. Peeves, the ghost we never saw. If you've read the books, you surely remember Peeves, the chaotic, noisy, and incredibly annoying poltergeist. He was a constant headache and a source of laughter for the Hogwarts staff. But here's the sad part: he was cut from the films entirely. Even though Peeves's scenes were filmed, actor Rick Mayall was removed from the final cut of the first movie. As a result, an entire layer of Hogwarts life, the pranks, the mischief, the eternal clash with Filch, simply vanished. And with it, a key part of the school's atmosphere that is so vivid in the books. Number 2. The Weasley Shop. Where did the money come from? Fred and George Weasley are unmatched inventors whose humour helped lighten even the darkest days. In Half-Blood Prince, we see their magnificent joke shop. But wait, how did they afford all that? If you haven't read the books, you may have missed it. After winning the Triwizard Tournament, Harry gave the entire prize, it's 1,000 galleons, it's to the twins. It wasn't just a generous gesture, but a meaningful act, showing his belief in them and their dream. And all of this could have been shown in just 30 seconds of screen time. Number 3. Peter Pettigrew's fate, a strange omission. Peter Pettigrew, the man who betrayed Harry's parents and served Voldemort, was a key supporting character. In the books, his story ends dramatically. The silver hand Voldemort gave him strangles him when he hesitates to kill Harry, showing a flicker of mercy. And in the films, he appears briefly at Malfoy Manor, and that's it. No explanation, no conclusion. He simply loses consciousness and disappears from the plot. Even fans are left wondering what happened to him. Number 4. Ron and the Quidditch Cup, a moment we missed. Ron Weasley often struggled with self-doubt, which is why his victories matter so much. In Order of the Phoenix, he becomes the Gryffindor keeper and helps win the Quidditch Cup. It's a major milestone for Ron, showing his growth and newfound confidence. But the film cuts Quidditch entirely from the plot, as if it never happened. We didn't just lose a match, we lost a turning point in Ron's journey. Number 5. Neville's parents, silent suffering. Neville Longbottom isn't just the clumsy kid in class. His story is steeped in pain. His parents, once fierce Order of the Phoenix members, were tortured into madness by Death Eaters. They now live in St. Mungo's hospital, unable to recognize their own son. In the books, Harry, Ron and Hermione see this for themselves, and we, the readers, understand the emotional weight Neville carries, but the films reduce this to a brief mention. Gone is the deep emotional blow that shapes who Neville is. Number 6. Dumbledore's letter to Aunt Petunia, remember my last. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry once again faces the threat of being thrown out by the Dursleys, but suddenly a mysterious letter arrives from Dumbledore, reminding Petunia of a promise she once made. She freezes. Harry stays. It's a short, powerful scene that hints at Petunia's hidden ties to the magical world. Her rejection of Lily wasn't as absolute as it seemed. Why this was cut from the movie remains a mystery. Number 7. The Muggle Prime Minister, shocked by magic. One of the most surprising yet impactful scenes in Half-Blood Prince is when the Muggle Prime Minister is visited by Fudge and Kingsley. He's informed of the magical world, the war with Voldemort, and the danger spilling into the non-magical realm. It sets the tone for the entire book, showing that the Dark Lord's threat isn't just confined to Hogwarts. This is a global crisis. It could have expanded the scope of the films, but never made it to screen. Number 8. The Dursleys' first glimpse of magic. Vernon Dursley stared in disbelief as a man in a purple cloak hugged someone in the street. Another shook hands with a postman. "Muggles have noticed," he muttered, gripping his steering wheel tighter. That morning, owls had been seen flying in daylight. A tabby cat sat reading a map. Strangers in cloaks whispered excitedly outside Grunnings. One of them even hugged Vernon after calling him a muggle. It was chaos. The normal world, the one Vernon clung to, was cracking. Something was coming, and the Dursleys were the first to feel it. In the book, this sequence sets the stage. Magic isn't hidden anymore. It leaks into the streets, into Vernon's office, into the Dursleys' living room. "The Potters, that's right, that was the name," he says, beginning to connect the dots. It's the perfect build-up. A magical world pushing against the seams of the ordinary, but the film skips most of it. The tension, the confusion, the delightful strangeness, gone. We go straight to baby Harry on the doorstep, but we never see the storm before the owl. And that storm made all the difference. Number 9, the tragic house of Gaunt. The shack was rotting. Flies buzzed over the table. Marvolo Gaunt, thin and furious, clutched a ring with the Slytherin crest like it was a crown. "My daughter shamed this house," he hissed. Merope sat in the corner, silent, bruised, her eyes down. Dumbledore watched this memory unfold with grim silence. This wasn't just a poor family, it was a poisoned legacy. Marvolo and his son Morphin were obsessed with blood purity, but lived in filth. Their magic had decayed with their morals. And in the middle of that decay, a child was conceived, Tom Riddle. Merope fell in love with a Muggle, used a love potion, became pregnant. Then, abandoned and alone, she gave birth in a cold orphanage and died. Tom Riddle never knew love, only control, and it all began in that shack. Dumbledore explained it to Harry. "You must understand where he comes from." These memories weren't just backstory, they were the roots of Voldemort's soul. The ring, the diary, the locket. He built his Horcruxes out of pain, and that pain came from the Gaunts. The film skipped it entirely. No Marvolo, no Morphin, no Merope. The ring just appears. The context is gone. The tragedy is gone. Voldemort becomes a villain without history, a shadow without origin. But in the book, his evil has a shape, a smell, a family name. The Gaunt memory didn't ask us to pity Tom Riddle. It asked us to understand him. And that understanding made his choices even more terrifying. Because he came from monsters and chose to become something worse. Number 10, the house elves join the battle. Kreacher stood at the front of the Hogwarts kitchens, a battered silver locket bouncing on his chest. His voice rang out across the halls. "Fight! Fight for my master, Regulus!" Behind him, dozens of house elves charged forward, armed with knives, frying pans, and whatever they could carry. They weren't soldiers. They weren't even welcome in most wizarding circles. But in that moment, they became warriors. Their loyalty wasn't to Hogwarts or the Ministry, it was to justice, and to a boy who once gave them kindness. This wasn't just a battle scene. It was the conclusion of a story arc that began when Hermione founded SPEW, a movement mocked by students and ignored by teachers. But Hermione never stopped. She knitted hats, she spoke up, she challenged the silence. And when Kreacher changed, when he began calling Harry Sir and cleaning Grimmauld Place with pride, we saw that change was possible. That dignity could be earned, even in a world built on old chains. In Deathly Hallows, the elves didn't hide. They rose. The films erased it all. SPW was never mentioned. Kreacher's redemption was reduced to a scene or two. The house elves' rebellion at the Battle of Hogwarts? Gone. What could have been one of the most inspiring moments in the war became a silent absence. And in cutting that, the films stripped Hermione of her heart and Creature of his soul. They took away a story about hope, about progress, about the smallest hands making the biggest difference. Number 11, The Final Duel, A Moral Stand. Tom Riddle stood in the centre of the great hall, his red eyes scanning the circle of survivors, wands raised, faces pale, but it wasn't a spell that followed, it was a voice. Harry stepped forward, no wand raised, no shield between them. "There's no more Horcruxes, Riddle," he said. "They're gone. You're mortal." He didn't whisper it. He told everyone. He wanted the world to hear, and then he offered something no spell could match: mercy. "Try for some remorse, Tom. I've seen what you'll become otherwise. Try." The final duel in the book was never about special effects. It was about truth. Harry called him Tom, not Voldemort, not the Dark Lord, just a man clinging to an illusion. "You're the one who's weak," Harry said. "You'll never know love or friendship, and I feel sorry for you." It was quiet, honest, in front of everyone. McGonagall, Kingsley, the Weasleys, the dead still lying nearby. Harry laid out the cost of cruelty. And Riddle laughed, then cast the final curse, but it rebounded, and Tom Riddle fell, lifeless, empty, unremarkable. The film gave us something else: a silent chase through corridors, magic exploding in the air, robes fluttering, two enemies dissolving into dust and wind, visually stunning, but hollow. No speech, no redemption, no one watching. The crowd didn't see Voldemort die, they saw Ash. Harry doesn't speak his name, doesn't explain the victory, doesn't offer a choice. The moment passes like just another battle scene. And the story loses its final message, because it was never about the Elder Wand, it was never about who had more power, it was about what power meant. In the book, Harry wins not by killing, but by understanding, by standing unarmed and still stronger. The film gave us fire, the book gave us forgiveness. One is exciting, the other is unforgettable. Number 12. Fred's Death, the Family's Grief. Fred Weasley was laughing when it happened. He had just made a joke. The walls of Hogwarts were shaking, but for a moment Fred was still Fred, smiling beside his older brother Percy, who had finally come home. Then came the explosion. In the book, it's sudden, brutal. George screams, Percy falls to his knees. "No, Fred, no!" And the world seems to stop. For the first time, Percy doesn't care about pride or ministry titles. He clutches Fred's body and sobs. It's raw, it's real. George doesn't say much. He doesn't have to. The silence that follows is louder than words. Later, J.K. Rowling writes, "The world had ended, so why had the battle not ceased? The castle fallen silent in horror, and every combatant laid down their arms." That single death shakes the entire Weasley family. Molly is silent at first, then she breaks. Ron stares in disbelief. Even Harry, in the middle of chaos, feels that everything has tilted. One twin gone, the other left in a world that suddenly makes no sense. In the film, none of this happens. The camera glides over the Great Hall, and Fred is already lying there, lifeless, untouched. No explosion, no last words, no laughter, no collapse from Percy, no scream from George, nothing. It's not a scene, it's background. The loss is shown but never felt. There's no grief, no closure, no space for the audience to say goodbye. By cutting that moment, the film erased more than a character. It erased grief. It erased love. Fred's death wasn't just a casualty of war, it was a turning point, a reminder that even joy can be stolen in an instant. Without that scene, we lose the full weight of what the war truly cost. We lose the Weasleys' broken hearts. We lose Fred's final laugh, and we deserved to feel all of it. Number 13, the real love story of Lupin and Tonks. Remus Lupin stood in the middle of number 12, grim old place, his face pale, eyes restless. He had just told Harry that he was leaving Tonks, that he couldn't bear the shame of what he was, what their child might become. "You don't understand," he said. "She's better off without me." But Harry did understand, and he exploded. "You're a coward!" he shouted. "Your son needs a father. Don't try to make me feel sorry for you." The room went silent. Lupin stared at him, stunned. That moment changed him. He didn't respond with fury. He didn't storm out. Instead, Lupin left, quietly. And days later, he came back. He had gone to Tonks, had apologized, had chosen love over fear. In Deathly Hallows, Lupin appears again at Shell Cottage, his voice steadier. "It's a boy," he tells Harry. "We've named him Teddy." The scene is brief, but full of hope. The werewolf who once lived in shame now stood as a husband and a father. That arc is powerful. It shows that even the most broken can heal. But the films skipped all of it. They show Tonks reaching out to hold Lupin's hand before the final battle. That's all. No fight. No Harry shouting. No transformation. Viewers never learned that Remus almost walked away from his family, or that Harry pulled him back from the edge, that Tonks forgave him, that their love endured. Instead, we're given a silent goodbye. Then a cut to their lifeless bodies in the Great Hall. The tragedy of Lupin and Tonks is not just in their deaths. It's in the way their story was buried. They weren't just names on a list. They had flaws, pain, redemption, Lupin's fear, Tonks's devotion, Harry's furious loyalty. All of it made their journey one of the most human in the series. But in the films, their story is a whisper. And that's not enough. Number 14. Professor Trelawney's humiliation. Professor Sybil Trelawney stood trembling in the middle of the courtyard, her arms full of shattered teacups and tattered shawls. Her eyes, once filled with theatrical mystery, were now glassy and wet. Students stared from the windows. Some whispered. Others simply watched in silence. Dolores Umbridge had finally done it, publicly dismissed her. "You are no longer needed," she had said with a sweet, poisonous smile. It wasn't just about firing a teacher, it was about breaking a soul. Trelawney stumbled over her own suitcase. The scent of burnt incense still clung to her robes. Her voice was gone. No prediction, no protest, just shame. And then the silence broke. Albus Dumbledore appeared at the far end of the courtyard, walking calmly but with fire in his eyes. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. He simply said, "You may not remove her from this castle." The line from the book is unforgettable. You have the power to remove her from the post of divination teacher, but you do not have the authority to banish her from this castle. In that moment, the headmaster did not defend her job. He defended her dignity. The students saw it, the teachers saw it. For once, even Umbridge flinched. She had wanted a scene, a public spectacle to assert dominance. But Dumbledore gave her something else, quiet defiance rooted in decency. He didn't undo her decree, but he made sure everyone remembered the difference between legal authority and moral courage. Trelawney, despite her broken state, was not alone. The film touches on this scene, but only briefly. There is no wait, no slow, painful walk through the courtyard. No lingering silence, no quote from Dumbledore. No real confrontation. On screen, it's just another moment. But in the book, it is a turning point, not just for Trelawney, but for Dumbledore. It shows what kind of man he truly is, one who protects the vulnerable even when the system stands against them. Number 15, The Dark Secrets of Dumbledore's Past. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, a crucial moment unfolds, not with a wand flick or a battle cry, but with a quiet discovery inside the old, decaying home of Bathilda Bagshot. There, in the dark corridors of a wizarding historian's house, Harry encounters not only the presence of Voldemort's traps, but the weight of history itself, messy, tangled, and painfully human. Among cobwebs and memories, he uncovers something far more shattering than a Horcrux. He finds out that Albus Dumbledore, his mentor, his guiding light, once stood on the edge of darkness, and leading him down this spiral of doubt is none other than the unscrupulous journalist Rita Skeeter, who has published The Life and Lies of Albus. Dumbledore, a biography that exposes secrets Harry never imagined existed. The films chose to gloss over this entire subplot, leaving out one of the most morally complex storylines in the entire series. Rita Skeeter, once just a comic nuisance in the Goblet of Fire, becomes a symbolic figure in Deathly Hallows, a mirror to the wizarding world's thirst for scandal, and a reminder that even heroes are made of flawed flesh and bone. Her biography is more than gossip. It is the unmasking of Dumbledore's past, and through it, Rowling challenges readers to question the infallibility of their idols. The greater good, the phrase that echoes through Skeeter's chapters, belonged not to noble causes but to dreams forged in ambition and ended in tragedy. It is through Rita's book that Harry learns of Dumbledore's sister Ariana, a girl whose magical abilities were suppressed after a brutal Muggle attack, and whose instability became the family's private shame. Rita writes, the tragic Ariana, imprisoned in her own home, never to attend Hogwarts, a quiet casualty of wizarding secrecy. The weight of this revelation is not just in the facts, but in the betrayal Harry feels. Dumbledore never spoke of her, never gave even a hint, and in hiding her, what did he hope to protect, her memory or his reputation? Then there is Aberforth Dumbledore, the gruff and bitter barkeep of the Hog's Head, who confirms what Harry read in Skeeter's pages. It was their fight, his fury at Albus and Gellert Grindelwald's dangerous dreams, that led to Ariana's accidental death. This moment, which in the book strikes with the force of a blow, is barely mentioned in the films. Aberforth says only a few lines, and Dumbledore's burden, his guilt, his humanity, is swept away in favour of pacing and plot. But in the book, this confession hits like thunder. It forces Harry to reckon with a simple, brutal truth. The man he admired was once capable of recklessness that cost a life. The heart of this omitted subplot is the friendship between Albus Dumbledore and Gellert Grindelwald, a relationship filled with dangerous ideals and youthful arrogance. Astonishing that such a brilliant mind could fall prey to such fantasies, Skeeter sneers in her book, but the reader understands the real pain beneath. Dumbledore did not just befriend a future dark wizard, he believed in him, believed in a shared vision where wizards would rule over muggles for the greater good. And in that vision we see not the wise headmaster, but a boy blinded by grief, desperate for control in a world that had stolen his parents and damaged his sister. This revelation is not merely historical background. It reframes the entire moral compass of the series. Can one atone for past sins by dedicating the rest of their life to protecting others? Can leadership and guidance come from someone who once stood so close to tyranny? These are the questions that torment Harry after reading Skeeter's biography. He spends pages wrestling with his disillusionment, with the terrifying feeling that perhaps he had been used, guided not by love, but by a cold strategist trying to fix old mistakes. Was he trying to make me do what he could not? Harry wonders. The doubt is corrosive, and the readers feel it with him. What makes this missing arc so significant is that it transforms Harry's journey from a quest against evil to a philosophical confrontation with imperfection. For 6 books, Dumbledore had been the infallible sage, the embodiment of goodness cloaked in twinkle-eyed mystery. But Deathly Hallows peels back that mask. The truth, ugly and incomplete, is that Dumbledore was once tempted by power, that he made choices that killed his sister, that he put Harry in mortal danger with the full knowledge he might die. "He knew I'd have to die," Harry says, bitter and lost. This is not the certainty of a hero's path, it is the agony of betrayal. Rita Skeeter's role in all of this is not just as a tabloid villain. Her biography forces the truth into the open. And while the tone of her writing is exploitative, the facts are not all lies. This is where Rowling's brilliance lies. Even the least trustworthy characters can tell truths the heroes refuse to face. Skeeter is awful, but her book is the chisel that cracks the marble statue of Dumbledore, revealing a flawed man beneath. The films stripped her out entirely, and in doing so robbed the audience of one of the saga's most profound dilemmas. The House of Bathilda Bagshot, too, is more than a haunted set piece. In the book, it's where the past seeps into the present. Bathilda, long dead, has been possessed by Nagini, and the scene plays out as a macabre echo of history's dangers. The physical horror is chilling, but the real terror is psychological. Harry enters the house believing in his mission and leaves with his faith shattered. The death of certainty is what occurs in Godric's Hollow, not just the snake attack. The films focused on the jump scare and ignored the existential collapse. Number 16, Percy Weasley's betrayal and redemption. Percy Weasley's story was never meant to be background noise. He was not just another redhead in a sea of Gryffindor scarves, nor merely the uptight brother with a penchant for rules. In the books, his arc was rich with tension, family betrayal, moral ambiguity, and ultimately devastating redemption. Yet in the films, this intricate subplot was stripped bare, reduced to brief glimpses and half-hearted appearances. Gone were the pages of turmoil that made Percy human. Gone was the devastating reunion in the Battle of Hogwarts. The films robbed us of one of the most human tragedies in the wizarding world. Percy's betrayal begins not with malice, but with ambition. Always the rule follower, the prefect, the head boy, his sense of order was not merely a personality quirk, it was his identity. When Cornelius Fudge and the Ministry of Magic began their campaign of denial against Harry Potter and Albus Dumbledore, Percy chose to align himself with the institution rather than his family. He accepted a promotion to junior assistant to the minister, a position that came with both prestige and a poison pill. Loyalty to a government that was actively spreading lies. When Arthur Weasley expressed skepticism, Percy did not hesitate to sever ties. He left the burrow without looking back. Percy would not be coming home for Christmas, the book says with finality, and the wound festers from that moment on. The betrayal cut especially deep for Molly Weasley. Her love for her children is the emotional heart of the series, a shelter from the storm of war. But Percy's absence became a gaping hole in her soul. She continued to set a place for him at the dinner table. She never stopped hoping. In Order of the Phoenix, there is a heartbreaking passage where Molly breaks down in tears, trying to fend off her worst fears as she confronts a boggart. One by one, it turns into the dead bodies of her children. Percy's absence was not just a disagreement, it was a phantom limb, a child still alive but lost to pride and politics. The films never dared to linger on this grief. They never gave Molly the dignity of heartbreak. Arthur, too, was wounded, though he wore it with quiet disappointment. His values, integrity, loyalty, compassion, had been rejected by a son he raised with care. The ministry was never his moral compass, his family was. Watching Percy parrot official lies, refusing to acknowledge Voldemort's return, Arthur felt the sting of not just defiance, but betrayal of truth. The books never presented Percy's decision as villainous, but they did not spare him from judgment either. His cold letter to Ron, warning him against associating with Harry, was chilling in its formality. He wrote as a bureaucrat, not a brother. The films gave us none of this. There was no scene, no argument, no letter. Percy simply drifted away, as if his exit required no explanation. The absence of Percy's storyline also dulled the sharp edges of the Weasley family's strength. In the books, their unity is tested in a way that deepens their humanity. They argue, they suffer, they fracture, and then with time and pain, they try to heal. Without Percy's arc, the films reduced the Weasleys to cheerful caricatures, comedic relief in red hair, and hand-me-down robes. But the books knew better. They understood that love is not always easy, that family is not immune to politics, and that forgiveness is a conscious, painful act. Percy's return was not sudden. It began with doubts, small cracks in the facade of his loyalty to the ministry. When Rufus Scrimgeour took over as Minister for Magic, Percy remained in position, but the justifications began to wear thin. The ministry's increasing authoritarianism, the persecution of Muggle-borns, and the suppression of dissent, these were realities Percy could no longer ignore. His silence became unbearable. In the Deathly Hallows, Percy finally broke ranks, walking away from the regime he once defended so zealously. He returned to the only place that had ever truly welcomed him, his family. The reunion is one of the most emotional moments in the final book. Percy arrives at Hogwarts just before the climactic battle, soaked and breathless, demanding to speak with his family. He apologizes, he laughs through tears. He asks for forgiveness. And he gets it. Not because the past didn't hurt, but because the Weasleys understood that courage is not only in spells and duels, it's in facing the ones you've hurt. The line from the book lands like a thunderclap. "I was a fool," he shouts. "I was an idiot. I was a pompous prat. I was a... But the words are drowned out by Fred's laughter. The brothers embrace. The pain is real, but so is the love. Then comes the moment that tears the soul. Percy, finally reunited with his brother Fred, stands beside him in the middle of battle. They fight together, side by side, the bitterness of years washed away in minutes. And then, in a single instant, Fred is gone. A violent explosion. A wall collapses. Fred's body lies still, eyes wide with the echo of his last joke. Percy doesn't scream, he howls. He falls to his knees, cradling his brother's body, refusing to let go. The book describes his devastation with a cruelty that only honesty can deliver. Percy was shaking his brother, and Ron was kneeling beside them. In that moment, everything Percy thought he could make right is shattered. This too the films erased. Fred's death was brief, almost sanitized. Percy's reaction, absent. His grief, invisible. His redemption, reduced to a background blur. There was no reunion, no apology, no trembling hands or broken voice. Percy Weasley, the prodigal son, was relegated to the role of extra. The story of his downfall and redemption, so powerfully written in the books, was deemed irrelevant to the visual spectacle. It was a narrative crime of omission, not just for Percy's character, but for the emotional arc of the Weasley family as a whole. Number 17, Christmas gifts and quiet acts of kindness. Every Christmas at Hogwarts brought with it a kind of quiet magic, different from the grand spectacle of duels, dragons, or secret chambers. It was a warmth found not in spells, but in gestures, knitted threads, awkwardly wrapped gifts, or a pair of mismatched socks. These were the moments that made Harry Potter feel truly at home, something he had never experienced in the Dursley household, where holidays were nothing more than days he was allowed to stay silent in the cupboard. The films, in their urgency to capture the plot's thunder, swept past these gentle moments as if they were expendable. But the books, with their quiet detail, told another story, a story of belonging, tenderness, and the silent revolution of love through small acts. On his first Christmas at Hogwarts, Harry wakes to find a pile of presents at the foot of his bed. He doesn't expect them. Why would he? For 11 years he had never been given anything, not even a kind word, on December 25th. Yet here, in a castle far from Privet Drive, he finds not just gifts, but the evidence that he is seen and cared for. Among them is something so ordinary it becomes extraordinary. A hand-knitted emerald sweater with a large golden H on the front. It was his very first Christmas present, the book whispers, as if aware of its own significance. Mrs. Weasley, having met Harry just once, knit it for him alongside her own sons. In the films, this moment is barely acknowledged, but in the book it is a threshold. The precise moment Harry enters a new world not of magic, but of family. Each Christmas afterward continues this quiet tradition, layering memories like snowflakes. The sweaters return every year, each one unique, a symbol of continuity and unspoken maternal love. Ron gets a maroon one he loathes. Fred and George receive ones with initials and enchanted fireworks, and Harry, once again, is folded into this eccentric and affectionate ritual. The sweaters become more than wool. They are a shield against the cold, not just the winters, but the coldness of the life he left behind. The movies condense all of this to a throwaway visual, a blink-and-miss-it glimpse of Harry holding a package. But the books give us the full story, the slow build of love. In Looped Yarn, gifts from Ron, Hermione, and Hagrid are never extravagant, but they are always thoughtful. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry receives a sneakoscope from Ron, a book on broomstick maintenance from Hermione, and a bizarre hand-knitted sweater with pockets from Hagrid. Each present reflects how the givers see Harry, not just as the boy who lived, but as a friend with real needs, hobbies, and affections. The broomstick book is a nod to his love of flying. The sneakoscope, often faulty, is a reflection of Ron's good intentions, even if his execution is imperfect. The films skip over these little windows into character. In doing so, they miss the careful stitching of friendship that the book spends so much time weaving. There's something intimate about the candy, too. The boxes of Bertie Bott's every flavour beans, chocolate frogs, and cauldron cakes. In Chamber of Secrets, Harry receives a large box of Bertie Bott's every flavour beans, chocolate frogs, and other wizard sweets. It's a candy lover's dream, but more than that, it's a care package. It's a reminder that someone thought of him, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Hermione's gifts are always practical, a homework planner, enchanted for reminders, or quills. Even these utilitarian gifts carry love in their logic. The films often render these Christmas mornings as quiet transitions between action scenes. In the books, they are a pause, a breath, a moment of grounding. One of the most touching Christmas exchanges happens in Goblet of Fire, a year marked by danger and anxiety. And yet, in the middle of Triwizard chaos, the tradition endures. Mrs. Weasley sends him another sweater, green again, with a dragon on it this time. Perhaps a cheeky nod to the tournament's first task. But the real weight of the moment lies not in the dragon, but in the message. Even in danger, someone is still mothering him. Someone is still thinking about whether he is warm, whether he smiles when he opens a box. That sweater says, "You are not alone." But it's the socks, of all things, that tell one of the most moving stories of Harry's transformation. In Goblet of Fire, Harry receives a pair of hand-painted socks from Dobby. One sock is covered in snitches, the other in broomsticks. They are mismatched, absurd, and filled with love. Dobby, who once had nothing, gives what he now values most. Earlier that year, Harry gave Dobby a pair of socks for Christmas, one red, one green. Dobby treasures them, he keeps them clean. He wears them with pride. Their exchange is humble but profound. Neither boy had been given much in life, but in this simple act, they give each other something immense: respect, joy, and autonomy. The movies mention none of this, yet. But the books dwell there, in the space between threads, between two unlikely friends who changed each other's worlds with wool and paint. Number 18, Ariana's portrait and Aberforth's help. Aberforth Dumbledore was not meant to be a footnote. In Deathly Hallows, he emerges not as a passive shadow of his brother, but as the last thread of resistance when all seems lost. In the quiet walls of the Hog's Head, far from the crumbling ministries and burning battlefields, Aberforth holds a secret passage, one that leads to hope. The films reduced him to a single exchange, a bitter warning and a flicker of resentment. But the book tells another story, of a man who carried the burden of his sister's death, who remained tethered to Hogwarts not through loyalty to the institution, but because of love, guilt, and a promise never spoken aloud. Aberforth owns the Hog's Head Inn in Hogsmeade, a pub as dusty and unwelcoming as its proprietor. His gruff demeanour disguises a loyalty deeper than anyone suspects. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione appear at the inn near the end of the 7th book, they are fugitives. The trio is hunted, weary, and without a plan. Yet Aberforth offers more than shelter. Behind his cold eyes and biting sarcasm lies a guarded tenderness. He reveals the truth about his brother, about their sister, Ariana. A story that rewrites everything Harry thought he knew about Albus Dumbledore. In the film adaptation, this critical moment is truncated to mere bitterness. Gone is the depth, the emotion, the haunting legacy of a family torn apart by ideals and ambition. The movie shows a man with a goat and a few grumbles, not a brother wrestling with history and grief. The book, however, grants Aberforth the dignity of depth. He tells Harry Albus was a natural, speaking not only of magic, but of manipulation. You have no idea what he was like, what he really was. These words dismantle the myth of perfection surrounding the headmaster and replace it with humanity. But beyond confession lies action. Aberforth doesn't merely talk, he acts. Hanging in the room behind the bar is the portrait of a young girl, Ariana. Her presence is ghostly and powerful, more than paint and canvas. She stands in front of a landscape that does not exist in this world because it belongs to another. Through her portrait is a passage, a hidden tunnel that leads directly into the room of requirement at Hogwarts. No wards detect it, no spell guards it, and no Death Eater expects it. This tunnel is not simply a plot device, it is a final gesture of familial redemption. Aberforth, who could have chosen isolation, becomes a conduit between resistance and sanctuary. When the trio steps through the tunnel, guided by Ariana's silent figure, they are not just entering Hogwarts, they are stepping into the heart of the final stand. The moment is imbued with meaning, the kind that cinematic cuts erase. In the book, the scene is heavy with reverence, a fallen sister enabling the return of the only hope left. Ariana's portrait is not magical in the traditional sense. She does not speak, does not move as flamboyantly as Phineas Nigellus or the Fat Lady, but she watches, and she walks. As Aberforth explains, she was sweet, kind, and scared of her own magic. Her presence is symbolic, a lingering memory, a silent participant in the war. Her tunnel becomes the artery through which the resistance flows. Through her, students like Neville Longbottom, Seamus Finnegan, and Dean Thomas return to Hogwarts unnoticed, defying Voldemort's regime in the only way they can, by surviving. Aberforth's Inn becomes an unrecognised headquarters, his role as a gatekeeper never lauded or remembered by the wider wizarding world. But without him, there would be no final battle. His portrait, the tunnel, and his quiet courage save more lives than a dozen wand-wielding heroes. In the film, none of this is shown. The entrance to Hogwarts becomes an unclear logistical jump. Viewers are left to guess how Harry re-enters the castle. The tunnel, Ariana's silent figure, Aberforth's choice, all of it disappears behind the curtain of adaptation. Yet in the book, this choice is a climax of its own. Harry is not ready to forgive Dumbledore. The loss of trust, the pain of betrayal, the weight of not knowing whether Albus was a good man or just a brilliant one, all of it crashes down in Aberforth's presence. And Aberforth does not defend his brother blindly. He admits the flaws. He sacrificed a lot, he says, but not always himself. This line lingers. It humanizes the Dumbledores more than any speech could. It makes their magic secondary to their mistakes. Aberforth's role deepens further in the battle. He does not retreat to the sidelines once the trio enters the school. He sends help. He fights. He provides cover. And he does it not out of a love for the Order or trust in the ministry, but because he sees the spark of resistance in those who haven't yet given up. His help is pragmatic, rough-edged. He doesn't offer speeches or strategy. He offers action. And that, more than anything, saves the day. In the book, Aberforth is more than a bitter sibling. He is a man who has spent his life living in the aftermath of someone else's legend. He watched his sister die. He watched his brother climb to power. And he watched the world forget her. The portrait of Ariana hanging in his pub is not decor. It is memory. It is mourning. It is a defiance against forgetting. Every time he looks at it, he remembers her laughter, her silence, and her death, and in helping Harry, he ensures that her life means something. The films rob viewers of this rich emotional tapestry. There is no Ariana in the Hog's Head, no tunnel, no slow march through secret hallways. The final return to Hogwarts is robbed of mystery and meaning. What could have been a haunting, tender moment becomes a blunt transition. For those who only watch the films, Aberforth is a one-note character. But the books reveal the complexity, the idea that even the least polished characters carry heroism in their own way. Aberforth does not seek credit. He doesn't stand beside the victors. He doesn't even attend the aftermath. He disappears into the background, content with what little he could offer. But his actions shape the course of the finale. He represents the kind of hero often forgotten, the one who opens doors, not leads charges, the one who shelters, not shines. In a war where grandeur often overshadows sacrifice, Aberforth Dumbledore is the quiet revolution. The omission of Ariana's portrait is not a simple cut. It is a removal of a symbol of grief, memory, and quiet bravery. The books give her a role in the finale not by resurrecting her or having her speak, but by making her the key to hope. Her portrait is a tunnel into freedom. Her image is the last gift of a broken family trying to heal. Her silence speaks louder than any spell. And in Aberforth's guarded gaze we see not bitterness, but a brother still holding on to the past because it is all he has left. This portrait, and the man who guards it, represent everything the final act stands for. The hidden cost of war, the forgotten figures who bear the burden, the unseen sacrifices. When Neville tells Harry that students have been hiding in the room of requirement, surviving on scraps and courage, it is Aberforth who made that possible. Not a general, not a spell, but a brother, a portrait, and a secret passage. The beauty of Aberforth's role is not in what he says, but in what he does. He allows the trio to slip back into the heart of Hogwarts like ghosts, unseen and unheard. He gives them time, space, and safety. And he does it not out of love for the cause, but because, perhaps for the first time, he chooses to stand where his brother once stood, not in philosophy, but in practice. He becomes the final Dumbledore to act not for himself, but for others. In the end, Aberforth's character arc is one of quiet redemption. Through his actions, he honors the sister they all failed. He breaks the cycle of inaction and regret. He opens the way forward. And when Ariana's portrait swings aside for the last time, revealing the path to revolution, it is not a painting that moves. It is history, grief, and a brother's last stand. Number 19, Fleur Delacour's loyalty and strength. Fleur Delacour entered the story like a glittering comet, dazzling, proud, and hard to reach. In the Goblet of Fire movie, she glides across the screen in slow motion, all silver hair and delicate beauty, the embodiment of Vila allure. But when the glow fades and the credits roll, she leaves behind no lasting impression, no story of her own. She is remembered as a pretty face, an accent, a presence in the background. Yet in J.K. Rowling's books, Fleur is anything but ornamental. Her character arc spans pain, loyalty, rejection, and defiance, and ultimately transforms her into one of the most underrated heroines in the series. It's a tragedy that the films reduced her to a stereotype, ignoring the layers that made her unforgettable on the page. During the Triwizard Tournament, Fleur is indeed portrayed with a certain haughtiness. Coming from Beauxbatons, the prestigious French wizarding school, and being part Vila, she is used to admiration and doesn't hesitate to act superior. But the novel version of Fleur is more than a proud beauty. She is a fiercely determined competitor. She dives into the icy depths of the Black Lake not for glory, but to save her little sister, Gabrielle. Even though she fails to rescue her in time, her terror and guilt are palpable. When she cries over her sister's safety and expresses gratitude toward Harry for bringing Gabrielle back, her arrogance falls away, and we see the raw, protective love of an older sister. That emotional reaction never made it into the movie. After the tournament ends, Fleur doesn't disappear. In the books, she stays in Britain and finds work at Gringotts, a choice that speaks volumes about her independence. She doesn't return to the glamour of Beauxbatons or retreat into her family's world. She chooses to remain in the magical heart of a country that barely understood her. And it is here that she meets Bill Weasley, not in a romantic whirlwind, but through work and proximity. Their relationship is not rushed. It's built in the margins of ordinary life. But this subtle love story never gets the attention it deserves on screen. The book version of Fleur doesn't charm the Weasleys. In fact, she irritates them. Molly Weasley finds her superficial, Ginny sees her as shallow, even Hermione scoffs at her haughty behavior. But Fleur doesn't try to win them over. She remains unapologetically herself, refined, self-assured, and uninterested in conforming to English sensibilities. Her love for Bill isn't loud or theatrical, it's constant. And when disaster strikes, it's Fleur who shows the depth of her heart. In Half-Blood Prince, Bill Weasley is mauled by Fenrir Greyback during the Battle of the Astronomy Tower. His injuries are gruesome, torn flesh, permanent scars, and the ominous possibility of becoming more wolf than man. The Weasley family is devastated, and beneath their grief lies an unspoken expectation. Fleur will leave. After all, she was drawn to the handsome Cursebreaker, the adventurous firstborn son with a dragon fang earring and long hair. Surely, now that he is disfigured, she will move on. Molly even suggests that Bill might prefer someone else now, someone more suited to caring for him. But Fleur does not falter. She does not break. Her response is one of the most powerful moments in the series. She declares without trembling that she is beautiful enough for the both of them. "What do I care how he looks?" she says. "I'm good-looking enough for both of us, I think. All these scars show is that my husband is brave." That line, simple and defiant, turns Molly's contempt into admiration. Fleur's loyalty pierces through all the preconceptions, and from that moment she becomes a daughter in the Weasley family, not through compliance, but through courage. This moment never appears in the films. The raw strength of Fleur's words is lost. The arc that transforms her from a misunderstood outsider to a beloved family member is cut, erased, as if it never mattered. On screen, she is present at Bill's wedding, but her story is silent. Her sacrifices are unspoken, her heart is hidden. When Fleur chooses to marry Bill during wartime, she does so knowing the danger, the instability, the shadow hanging over them. Her wedding, set at the Burrow in Deathly Hallows, is not just a celebration. It is an act of defiance. It's a statement that love and commitment can exist even under the threat of death. She wears white and gold, not because she is vain, but because beauty can be an act of resistance. Her grace at the wedding is not just a visual. It's emotional armor. She marries Bill, scars and all, not despite the war, but in the midst of it. During their time at Shell Cottage, Fleur becomes a pillar of safety. She and Bill offer sanctuary to the injured and the hunted. Griphook, Luna Lovegood, Mr. Ollivander, each one finds protection under Fleur's roof. She is no longer the aloof foreigner, but a quiet force of compassion. In a world crumbling under the weight of fear, Fleur becomes a healer, a host, and a protector. Her home becomes a haven, her love becomes a shield. And yet in the films this role is barely acknowledged. The cottage exists, but Fleur's humanity does not. There is a tender nobility in how Fleur carries herself. She does not chase approval. She is not ashamed of her background or her appearance. She refuses to be smaller to make others comfortable. This too is a kind of bravery. In a world that values humility over self-assurance in women, Fleur's unshakable confidence is mistaken for arrogance. But the books never let her strength be misinterpreted for long. Rowling ensures that Fleur earns respect not by changing herself, but by proving that her love is stronger than anyone expected. Fleur also plays a key role during the escape from Malfoy Manor. Though not in the thick of the battle, she and Bill take in the wounded and traumatized. Their home becomes the last stop before the final war. Fleur does not wield a wand in those scenes, but she creates the conditions that allow others to keep fighting. It's easy to praise the warriors, it's harder to notice the ones who keep the warriors standing. Fleur is one of those characters, quietly powerful, deeply necessary, and often ignored. In her final appearance, Fleur is still standing beside Bill at the Battle of Hogwarts. She fights alongside the others, her wand raised, her courage unbroken. She does not dominate the fight, nor is she portrayed as a hero of legend, but she is present, determined, and unshaken. Her bravery is not loud, it does not need to be. Fleur Delacour never sought attention, she only gave love, and in return built a life out of loyalty and steel. The tragedy of the films is not that they made Fleur beautiful. She was always meant to be so. The tragedy is that they made her hollow. They removed her anger, her pride, her complexity. They stripped away her defiance and her tenderness. By turning her into a side character with no arc, they robbed the audience of one of the most moving examples of love in the series. Not just romantic love, but familial, protective, enduring love. When we talk about overlooked characters in Harry Potter, we often mention Tonks or Charlie or even Lavender Brown. But Fleur Delacour belongs on that list for reasons far deeper than most remember. She was introduced as an image but evolved into a woman of depth and flame. She stayed when others expected her to run. She gave when others assumed she had nothing to offer. And she loved, not for beauty, but in spite of pain. To read the books is to know Fleur. To watch the films is to forget her. And perhaps that is the saddest magic of all. Number 20, Harry's final speech in the Great Hall. When the dust of battle settled in the ruins of Hogwarts, silence fell across the Great Hall. Not the silence of peace, but the kind born of shock, grief, and awe. Bodies lay unmoving, friends and enemies alike. People wept. Some clung to one another, others stood alone, stunned. And in the midst of it all, Harry Potter was not just a boy who had lived. He was now the man who had died and come back, the boy who had stood unarmed before Voldemort and still emerged victorious. But unlike the film's abrupt closure, the book granted him a moment of truth, not for glory, but for clarity. This was no ordinary victory. And Harry's final words to the survivors were not cheers of triumph, but a solemn unraveling of the mystery that had held the wizarding world hostage for so long. J.K. Rowling gave Harry one final monologue in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows that served as the true epilogue to the battle. Not just a physical ending, but an intellectual and emotional resolution. He did not simply defeat Voldemort, he dismantled the myth of his invincibility. Harry stood among the battered and bruised and told them not how he won, but why Voldemort lost. The films, for all their visual power, stole that closure. Instead of illuminating the cost and the method of victory, they showed Harry silently snapping the Elder Wand in half and tossing it into an abyss. No explanation, no truth, no understanding. As if a war could end with a gesture and no words. In the book, Harry doesn't discard the wand out of fear. He doesn't flee from power. He confronts it and chooses not to wield it. That difference is not cosmetic. It is the heart of the story. "The wand's more trouble than it's worth," he says, standing over Dumbledore's grave. But before that, before the burial, he offers a speech in the Great Hall that the films erased entirely. A moment that should have been cinematic gold was instead left behind like ashes after a fire. In this scene, Harry reveals to everyone, Ron, Hermione, McGonagall, Kingsley, and even the Malfoys, how Voldemort truly died. He tells them about the Elder Wand, about the wand's allegiance, about how Draco Malfoy, not Snape, was its master. Harry does not gloat. He does not posture. Instead, he dissects the lies and half-truths that Voldemort built his reign upon. "I've told you all, Voldemort tried to kill me," he says, "but that wand, it's mine." The magic that killed Voldemort was not cast by Harry, but by Voldemort himself. His final spell, the Killing Curse, rebounded because the wand refused to harm its rightful master. That master was Harry, and in that moment, Voldemort was no longer a fearsome tyrant. He was just Tom Riddle, an orphaned boy who misunderstood the very essence of magic. The speech is not about power, but understanding. Harry tells them about the Horcruxes. He reveals that Voldemort's soul had been splintered, that each piece had to be destroyed. And he says, with quiet honesty, that he himself had been one of those Horcruxes. He had walked into the Forbidden Forest to die, not to win. "He killed me with it," he says, "but I wasn't really dead." It is in this admission that the story finds its soul. Harry lived not because he was stronger, but because he was willing to die. The power that saved him was not a spell, but sacrifice. It was the very magic his mother had used to shield him as a baby, the kind Voldemort never understood. When Harry finally addresses the Elder Wand, it is not with reverence, but with weariness. This is the wand that caused the duel between Dumbledore and Grindelwald, that passed through centuries of death and betrayal, that Voldemort coveted with every ounce of his soul. And now it lies in Harry's hand, its true master. He could use it to command the world, to rebuild, to rule, even to resurrect. But he doesn't. Instead, he says that he will return it to Dumbledore's tomb. "If I die a natural death like anyone else, its power will be broken." That single sentence dismantles centuries of dark ambition. In the film, this is reduced to a mute moment on a wooden bridge. No one hears the explanation. The wand snaps, it falls, and the meaning dissolves like fog in sunlight. What should have been a profound act of will is instead a cinematic gesture stripped of weight. Why would Harry destroy the most powerful wand in existence? Who did it belong to? What did it mean to win without using it? The viewer never knows. They are left with silence, when they should have had a revelation. In the book, Harry's rejection of the wand is not about destroying power. It is about understanding it. That difference matters. Voldemort died trying to master death. Harry won by surrendering to it. Where Tom Riddle feared death so much he fractured his soul, Harry walked into death and came back whole. And this is what he tells them in the Great Hall, that Voldemort's defeat was not luck or brute force. It was a result of knowledge, of insight, of sacrifice. The survivors listen. Some still weep. Others raise their heads, slowly processing the truth. The Great Hall, still lined with the bodies of the fallen, Fred, Lupin, Tonks, becomes more than a battleground. It becomes a classroom, a place where the final lesson of the war is taught. That victory isn't always about spells and curses, but about knowing what not to do, about choosing to end cycles instead of perpetuating them. And that is why Harry's speech matters. It is not just exposition, it is closure. Draco Malfoy, who silently watches, realizes that he was part of something much larger than he ever understood. The wand had shifted allegiance to him when he disarmed Dumbledore, but he never used it, he never knew. And now Harry, the boy he once called Scarhead, tells the world that Draco unknowingly broke the chain of violence, that it was not Voldemort's brilliance, but a teenager's accidental courage that sealed his fate. This too is lost in the films. Malfoy's subtle redemption vanishes behind a curtain of action scenes. There is also the matter of Snape. In the books, Harry explains that Voldemort murdered Snape, believing that would make the Elder Wand his, that Snape died in vain because Voldemort misunderstood how wand loyalty worked. It's a cruel irony, one that shows how little Voldemort truly knew about the world he sought to rule. In the films, this explanation is muddled, vague, barely addressed. The tragedy of Snape is given no conclusion, no vindication, but in the book, Harry tells it clearly and with compassion, not for the audience, but for truth. Kingsley, McGonagall, and even the surviving Death Eaters bear witness to Harry's words, and for once there is no fighting, no accusations, only understanding. The war is over, but without this speech there is no clarity. The films show a battle, a death, a flash of green light, but they forget the heart, the meaning, the why. Harry's monologue is not just an epilogue, it is a thesis, the final argument in a story about love, death, and the choices that define us. That moment, stripped away from the screen, is one of the most profound in the entire series. Not because it adds plot, but because it reveals purpose. Voldemort's death was not an explosion, it was a collapse, a man undone by his own spells, his own fear, and his refusal to understand. And only Harry, standing among the wounded, was left to explain that, to give the world the full picture, a picture that included every loss, every sacrifice, and every lesson. This was not just a missed scene, it was a missed truth. By cutting that speech, the films gave us a visual end without an emotional one. They closed the curtain, but never let us hear the final lines. And in doing so, they robbed the audience of the very thing Rowling built across 7 books, an ending that was earned, not just shown. The victory belonged not just to Harry, but to every reader who understood that love, not might, was the most powerful magic of all. Number 21. Stan Shunpike, a victim of the system. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, something quietly sinister happens in the background of the wizarding world, something that the films completely erase without a trace. Stan Shunpike, the slightly bumbling but well-meaning conductor of the night bus, becomes a victim of the Ministry of Magic's need to appear competent and in control. In the book, his arrest is announced in passing, a brief news item from the wizarding wireless that Harry hears at the Burrow. But what's buried beneath that simple announcement is one of the most mature and unsettling truths J.K. Rowling ever dared to tell her readers, that institutions, even magical ones, can sacrifice the innocent to maintain power. Stan's name is not spoken once in the 6th film. But in the book, he becomes the symbol of what happens when the government is more concerned with optics than with truth. Harry immediately recognizes the injustice. Stan isn't clever enough to be a Death Eater. He's a talkative, slightly dim-witted young man who likely repeated something foolish at the wrong time. The Ministry, terrified after the return of Voldemort, grabs at anyone it can throw into Azkaban to suggest it's making progress. It's not just about punishing the guilty, it's about creating the illusion that the system is still working. Harry understands this, and he is furious. When Rufus Scrimgeour, the new Minister of Magic, attempts to recruit Harry as a symbol of unity and hope, Harry throws Stan's arrest in his face. He's only in there because he was stupid enough to brag about something he'd never done, Harry thinks, seething with frustration. What makes this moment so important is not just Stan's fate. It's the fact that Harry sees through the Ministry's lies. For the first time, he fully understands that good authority can be corrupt. Scrimgeour wants Harry to pretend that all is well, to reassure the public, to serve as a poster boy. But Harry refuses to play along. "I don't want to be used," he says, echoing the rising moral strength inside him. He has grown past blind trust in authority, past the illusions of childhood. He saw Cornelius Fudge lie to the world about Voldemort's return. He saw Dolores Umbridge torture students with a smile, and now he sees the Ministry lock away an innocent man just to save face. This shift in Harry is subtle but pivotal. Throughout the series, he moves from being a boy who believes in adults to being a young man who challenges them. Stan Shunpike's wrongful imprisonment is the first moment in Half-Blood Prince where Harry steps into the role of someone who no longer just reacts to events, but questions the system that allows those events to happen. This is not the wide-eyed boy of the first books who assumed Dumbledore or the Ministry always knew best. This is a future leader awakening to the rot beneath the surface. Rowling plants this plotline with quiet confidence, never giving Stan much page time, but making his case resonate throughout the book. It's not just a footnote, it's a theme. The war against Voldemort isn't just against an evil wizard, it's against fear, manipulation, and political cowardice. In the wizarding world, fear creates false enemies, and Stan becomes one of them. Scrimgeour tells Harry the Ministry needs to look like it's doing something, but Harry replies bitterly, "That's not good enough. Stan Shunpike's been arrested for no reason." This line becomes a battle cry of sorts, one that shows just how much Harry has grown into someone who won't tolerate easy lies. It's disturbing how the films, which had the opportunity to visually explore this political darkness, erase Stan's story altogether. By removing Stan from the Half-Blood Prince film, the filmmakers stripped away one of the clearest symbols of systemic failure in the wizarding world. It's not just that Stan was omitted, it's that Harry's transformation from a pawn to a defiant voice loses its foundation. Without Stan's case, Harry's anger at the Ministry in the movie feels abstract. In the book, it is deeply personal, grounded in a very real miscarriage of justice. The narrative arc of Harry's leadership begins not in epic battles, but in small acts of defiance. His refusal to support the Ministry's lies is the first true act of rebellion that is not about Voldemort, but about ethics. This is where the reader sees him become more than a student, more than the chosen one. He becomes a man willing to speak truth to power. And Rowling makes it clear that power is not always Voldemort-shaped. Sometimes it wears robes, speaks gently, and claims to want peace. Stan Shunpike's arrest is particularly tragic because of who he is, a nobody. He's not rich or connected. He doesn't have allies in high places. He's just a name the Ministry can afford to ruin. This is what makes Harry's defense of him so moving. Harry has nothing to gain and everything to lose by challenging the Ministry's narrative, but he does it anyway. That's what heroes do, not just fight dragons, but refuse to let the innocent be crushed under the wheels of propaganda. There's also a deeper, more haunting undercurrent here, that the wizarding justice system is broken. Azkaban is not a place of rehabilitation or truth-seeking, it is a weapon of fear. By locking Stan there, the Ministry sends a message, not just to the public, but to people like Harry, fall in line or you could be next. This is the atmosphere that Rowling crafts with quiet brilliance. The world isn't just at war with Voldemort, it's at war with itself, with its own cowardice and desire for control. And Harry, in defending Stan, doesn't just reject Scrimgeour's offer, he declares that he won't be complicit in a lie. When the minister tells him, "These are dangerous times, young man," Harry shoots back, "and they're going to be more dangerous if people like you keep arresting the wrong people." This line, direct from the book, cuts like a blade. It's not just about one man, it's about the soul of a society. What happens when the protectors become the oppressors? That moment, buried in the pages of Half-Blood Prince, is one of Rowling's clearest critiques of blind nationalism and authoritarianism. Stan is a tool in a political theatre, and Harry's refusal to play along is the moment he proves himself worthy of leading the resistance, not because he's brave in battle, but because he's brave in truth. He doesn't need a wand or a prophecy, he just needs a conscience. That's what the movies missed, that the battle for justice doesn't always happen with spells. Sometimes it happens in quiet moments, in words spoken against the tide. There is a heartbreaking irony to Stan's fate. The wizarding world fears Voldemort's ability to manipulate and control, but in its desperation to appear strong, it mirrors his tactics. Innocents are silenced, scapegoats are sacrificed, and fear becomes policy. Harry sees this and steps away. It's not enough to fight Voldemort if the system that replaces him is just as cruel. Rowling does not make this lesson loud or flashy. She tucks it into a subplot and lets it speak for itself, but it speaks volumes. By the end of the book, Stan is still in Azkaban and Harry is more alone than ever. He has alienated the Ministry. He has turned down the role of national hero, but he has gained something far more valuable: moral clarity. In a world drowning in fear, he chooses truth. This, more than any battle scene, shows us why Harry matters. Why he is not just the boy who lived, but the boy who understood that living meant standing up, even when no one else does. The omission of Stan's story from the film adaptation is not just a missed opportunity. It's a betrayal of a central message. Without Stan, Harry's resistance feels less urgent, less grounded in reality. The political dimension of the wizarding world fades into the background, and Harry's moral growth is flattened into simple defiance. But in the book, we see the real cost of war, not just the bodies, but the integrity of the institutions meant to protect them. Stan Shunpike is not a hero, not a villain, not even a major character, but he is a mirror. Through him, we see the cost of fear. Through Harry's response, we see the emergence of a new kind of leader, one who chooses justice, not comfort, one who understands that silence in the face of injustice is its own kind of betrayal, and one who will never again believe that power on its own deserves respect. Number 22. Dumbledore's symbolic bequests. In the flickering light of the Burrow's kitchen, a quiet ceremony unfolded, a moment cloaked in sorrow and meaning. The trio, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, sat before Rufus Scrimgeour as he read aloud the last will and testament of Albus Dumbledore. What should have been an ordinary legal formality was, in truth, Dumbledore's final lesson. In the pages of the Deathly Hallows, this moment resonates with mystery, symbolism, and emotion, but in the films it slips past in haste, stripped of its purpose, turned into a perfunctory delivery of magical trinkets. The deep, quiet brilliance of Dumbledore's gifts is lost, and with it, a cornerstone of the story's soul. Ron receives the Deluminator, a device introduced back in the Philosopher's Stone, used by Dumbledore to snuff out the street lamps on Privet Drive. At first glance, it appears to be a novelty, a clever, magical tool, nothing more. But Dumbledore knew Ron's heart. He knew the insecurities that haunted him, the shadows cast by 6 older brothers, the tendency to feel like a sidekick in someone else's story. The Deluminator, rather than being just a way to turn off lights, becomes a guide home. When Ron is overwhelmed by the weight of the Horcrux and leaves Harry and Hermione in a moment of weakness, it is the Deluminator that brings him back. The light Dumbledore gave him is not just magical, it is spiritual. The ball of light, Ron tells them later, went inside me. Dumbledore gave him more than a path. He gave him belonging, a way back to those he loved. Hermione receives the Tales of Beedle the Bard, a book of wizarding fairy tales that she initially views with skepticism. It is, after all, a collection of children's stories, seemingly beneath the sharp intellect of someone like Hermione Granger. But Dumbledore understood that logic alone would not solve what lay ahead. Within that innocent-looking book is the parable of the Deathly Hallows, the foundation of the entire final installment. The tale of the 3 brothers disguised as folklore is in fact a key to unraveling Voldemort's obsession with immortality. By leaving Hermione the book, Dumbledore trusted her to pierce through legend and uncover truth. He also nudged her toward a broader understanding of magic, one that embraces the irrational, the emotional, the human. "Are you planning to follow a story?" she asks Harry, incredulous. But eventually she does, and it saves them. To Harry, Dumbledore leaves the golden snitch he caught in his first Quidditch match. But this is no ordinary snitch. It contains something hidden, something that will only reveal itself when Harry is ready. Written upon it are the words, "I open at the close." These 4 cryptic words haunt Harry throughout the Deathly Hallows, a puzzle whose answer lies not in magic, but in the acceptance of death. For the snitch holds the resurrection stone, one of the Deathly Hallows, which can summon the shadows of those long gone. But it will not open with force or cleverness. Only when Harry accepts that he must die does the snitch yield. It opens in the forest in the face of Voldemort when Harry walks toward his death, not with fear, but with resolve. The gift Dumbledore left him is not just a stone, it is understanding, maturity, sacrifice. It is the moment Harry becomes a man. The magic of Dumbledore's gifts lies not in their enchantments, but in what they represent. Each is a mirror reflecting the soul of the recipient. For Ron, the Deluminator is a light in the dark, a promise that even when lost he will be found. For Hermione, the book is a bridge between intellect and belief, between fact and faith. For Harry, the snitch is a final embrace, a silent nudge toward the path Dumbledore himself once feared to walk. These objects are Dumbledore's way of guiding them from beyond the grave, not with commands, but with trust. He knew he would not be there for the final steps, so he gave them pieces of himself. In the films, these gifts are reduced to curiosities. The Deluminator is shown once or twice without context or emotional payoff. The snitch appears briefly, the inscription passed over like a slogan, its meaning unexplored until the very last moment. And the Tales of Beedle the Bard is barely mentioned, save for a brief animated segment recounting the story of the 3 brothers. The philosophical weight is gone. The viewer sees the items but not their purpose. The audience is given the puzzle but never the solution. When Ron returns to the tent, drenched and shivering, the moment is brushed aside. There is no illumination, no explanation of how the Deluminator led him. Yet in the book, it is a powerful moment of redemption, of friendship mended through love and loyalty. "It sort of floated toward me," Ron says, "and I understood. I just knew it was leading me." That knowledge, that mystical connection to his friends, is never given a breath on the screen. Hermione's journey with the book is a subtle but essential arc. She, the rationalist, begins to see that not everything in the world is governed by logic. The tale of the 3 brothers opens her eyes to the idea that myths may hold truth. This shift allows her to understand Xenophilius Lovegood, to believe Luna, to trust in symbols. It is a spiritual evolution for a character often ruled by intellect, and yet in the films this growth is muted. The book is handed to her with no ceremony, and its role is reduced to exposition. Harry's relationship with the snitch is perhaps the most tragic omission. The film glosses over the inscription's meaning, and the emotional depth of the scene in the Forbidden Forest is abbreviated, but in the novel it is a crescendo of sacrifice. Harry holds the snitch, kisses it and whispers, "I am about to die." Only then does it open. In that moment, the boy who once feared death more than anything walks calmly to his end. The resurrection stone spins into his hand, and from it emerge his parents, Sirius and Lupin. Not to save him, but to walk beside him. Dumbledore's gift is not just the stone, it is the courage to open it. There is a poetic symmetry in these gifts. Dumbledore, the man who once sought the Hallows for selfish reasons, now uses them not to conquer death, but to prepare others for it. He gives them away not as weapons, but as wisdom. It is a gesture of humility, of trust. He believes in the trio, not just their abilities, but their hearts. He knows Ron will feel lost, so he gives him a light. He knows Hermione will face puzzles beyond logic, so he gives her stories. He knows Harry must walk into the dark, so he gives him the means to do so without fear. The gifts are also a reflection of Dumbledore's own regrets. The resurrection stone, once sought in his youth to see his lost sister again, now becomes a tool for another. He resists the temptation to use it himself. Instead, he entrusts it to a boy who will not exploit it, but honor it. The Deluminator, a whimsical invention of his own, becomes a beacon for reconciliation, and the book, simple, innocent, is Dumbledore's admission that he once overlooked the power of fairy tales, of love, of trust. Through these gifts, he attempts to do better. This layer of meaning is what the films miss. In their rush to cover ground, to show battles and betrayals, they lose the soft moments where real magic happens. Dumbledore's will is not just a legal document, it is a map, a prophecy, a final act of love. To cut away its explanation is to rob the story of its pulse. The viewer sees the surface but not the sea beneath. Had the films lingered just a moment longer, allowed the silence to speak, allowed the characters to wrestle with these strange objects, perhaps more would understand the genius of Dumbledore's plan. Instead, his final gifts become mere footnotes, buried under special effects and spectacle, but in the pages of the book they shine. They are his last whispers to those he loved, his final lessons, his quiet goodbye. Number 23. Archie and the Skirt at the Quidditch Cup. During the Quidditch World Cup in the fourth book of the Harry Potter series, a short, seemingly comical moment unfolds that never made it into the film adaptation. Yet this overlooked scene holds far more weight than one might expect. A wizard named Archie, an elderly man with a determined sense of self, refuses to wear Muggle trousers despite repeated urgings from the Ministry of Magic. Instead, he proudly struts through the campgrounds in a long, lacy nightgown, unapologetically expressing his individuality. "I like a healthy breeze around my privates, thanks," he says to a frustrated ministry official who's trying to ensure that wizards blend in with Muggles during the event. The films, unfortunately, discarded this moment entirely, missing an opportunity to show something more profound about the wizarding world's quiet rebellion against conformity. Archie's defiant presence may seem like a mere comic relief in the book's larger context, but in reality, he represents something deeper, a portrait of personal freedom in a magical society that, while flawed, embraces eccentricity in ways the Muggle world often doesn't. The imagery is vivid. This old wizard, standing tall in a nightdress adorned with frills, surrounded by wizards in trench coats and top hats, refusing to sacrifice his comfort or identity to placate a government worker. There is no malice in his actions, only sincerity. J.K. Rowling paints him with affection, not ridicule, allowing readers to laugh with him, not at him. And that subtlety carries weight. This scene is not just about a man in a nightgown. It's about the Ministry of Magic's ongoing struggle to regulate how wizards present themselves among non-magical people. The entire setup of the Quidditch World Cup was in part to show the bureaucratic and often absurd efforts of the wizarding authorities to maintain secrecy while hosting thousands of magical beings. From enchanted tents to confusing portkeys, the Ministry tries its best to keep things under wraps, but Archie's character disrupts this illusion of control. His refusal to wear trousers isn't just stubbornness, it's an assertion of identity in the face of artificial rules. This moment also quietly comments on freedom of expression. While most wizards reluctantly follow the Ministry's demands to wear drab Muggle clothing, Archie embraces his individuality. His resistance is not loud or angry, it is humorous, yet firm. He is comfortable in his skin, or rather, in his lace. His simple stance, like the freedom of skirts, reflects a profound comfort with himself that stands in contrast to the Ministry's constant fear of exposure and scandal. This is not about fashion, but about autonomy and the quiet dignity of living honestly. The decision to cut this moment from the films robbed the audience of a rare chance to see the wizarding world through a different lens. not just as a place of wands and potions, but as a society built on oddities, acceptance, and resistance to homogenization. The films often painted a much grimmer and more uniform version of the magical world, especially from the third installment onward. Scenes of joy, laughter, and magical peculiarity were traded for a darker palette and heavier tone. While that shift served the overarching plot about Voldemort's return and the growing threat, it also muted some of the whimsy and emotional nuance that gave the books their heart. Archie is more than comic relief. He's part of the world's moral compass. In a story increasingly filled with divisions, rules, and fear, he is a small but important reminder that magic thrives where individuality is protected. Unlike the Death Eaters, who enforce a vision of pure-blood dominance and strict societal roles, Archie's quiet rebellion is deeply humane. His insistence on wearing what makes him feel free flies in the face of the Ministry's efforts to sanitize and control how wizards engage with the world. There's a quiet radicalism in that nightgown, and a lesson in how institutions often prioritize appearance over truth. What's also striking is how the wizarding community doesn't mock him. No one curses him, shames him, or treats him like a freak. Even the ministry official trying to convince him to wear trousers does so more out of duty than contempt. This lack of public judgment reveals something beautiful about wizard society. For all its flaws, the corruption, the prejudice, the inefficiency, it still contains space for people to be deeply, unapologetically themselves. In the Muggle world, a man like Archie might have been ridiculed or even harassed. In the magical world, he's just another oddball among many. Rowling's choice to place Archie in the Quidditch World Cup scene is significant. This event isn't just about sport, it's about unity. Witches and wizards from all over the world gather to celebrate a shared love of Quidditch. And amid all this festivity, Archie walks calmly in his nightdress, blending seamlessly into a crowd that's inherently chaotic, magical, and diverse. His presence emphasizes that true inclusion is not about tolerance but celebration of differences, quirks, and personal choices that make each individual unique. It's also essential to consider how this small episode balances the book's darker undertones. The fourth installment, The Goblet of Fire, marks the narrative's shift toward more serious themes: death, betrayal, manipulation, and the return of Voldemort. The Quidditch World Cup begins with excitement but ends in terror as the Death Eaters attack the campgrounds and the dark mark appears in the sky. Archie's scene, which takes place before the chaos, offers a warm, funny, and quietly powerful moment that makes what follows all the more tragic. It reminds readers what's at stake, not just lives, but the very spirit of the magical world. The films, while visually stunning, often neglected these tonal balances. By omitting Archie, they missed a chance to explore the rich cultural tapestry of the magical world. Moments like his don't just entertain, they illuminate values. They show how magic is not just in spells, but in the way people accept one another. Archie's skirt becomes a symbol, not of rebellion, but of peaceful coexistence. He doesn't need to explain himself because, in the wizarding world, being yourself is not a crime, at least not yet. One might argue that the films had to make difficult choices due to time constraints and that scenes like Archie's weren't essential to the main plot. But storytelling is never only about the plot, it's about the world. The world Rowling created is rich with detail, and these details are what make the stakes matter. Archie isn't central to Harry's journey, but he is central to ours, as readers, as observers, as people trying to understand what magic really means. To strip the story of these characters is to flatten it, to turn a world into a mere background. Archie's presence is also a lesson in dignity. He's not wealthy, powerful, or influential. He's an old man with a firm sense of self, walking through a crowd in a dress that catches the breeze. And in that simplicity there's a kind of magic that no wand could replicate. His story is not one of grandeur, but of authenticity, and that is its power. He reminds us that in the grand chaos of battles, tournaments, and prophecies, The small choices we make about how to live are what truly shape the world. His scene also deepens our understanding of the Ministry of Magic, so often portrayed as inept or overbearing. The Ministry here is shown trying clumsily to enforce conformity under the guise of diplomacy. It's a comic bureaucracy more annoying than evil. Yet in Archie's refusal to yield, we see the seeds of the same resistance that will later define the Order of the Phoenix and Dumbledore's army. The books are filled with people who say no to power in small, quiet ways. Archie is one of the first and one of the gentlest. Perhaps that's why his absence from the films feels so glaring. In a franchise filled with spells and danger, a moment of calm, humorous defiance could have stood out as one of the most human scenes. It's easy to show a battle. It's harder to show a man standing up for his right to be comfortable. But sometimes those moments matter more. They ground the story in lived experience, in the fabric of the magical world that Rowling so carefully stitched together. Without them, the films become colder, sharper, and less alive. Ultimately, Archie's story reminds us that magic is not only about what you can do, but about who you are allowed to be. In a world where darkness is rising, his simple refusal to wear trousers becomes a quiet anthem of selfhood. It tells us that in the wizarding world, identity is not a burden but a celebration, and that, in the end, might be the most powerful spell of all. Number 24, Harry's outburst at Dumbledore. In the dimly lit office of Albus Dumbledore, silence reigned. Yet in the pages of the fifth book, that silence was shattered by something far more real, far more human than any spell could conjure: Harry Potter's fury. This wasn't just adolescent angst or magical mischief gone wrong. This was pain laid bare, a young man's heart cracking open after months of confusion, abandonment, and grief. The book did not flinch from this emotional eruption. Harry, once respectful and even reverent toward the headmaster, finally broke the mask of patience and obedience he had worn for too long. What poured out of him wasn't just anger, it was betrayal, fear, guilt, and loss, all tangled together into one devastating outburst that changed his relationship with Dumbledore forever. And yet, in the film, that moment, the most emotionally complex scene in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, is nowhere to be found. From the very first chapter, the fifth book builds a suffocating atmosphere around Harry. He is isolated at Privet Drive, tormented by dreams he does not understand, and, worst of all, left in the dark by the very people he trusts most. Letters from Ron and Hermione are vague and cautious. Dumbledore, who had always been a beacon of safety and guidance, is now a ghost, present in the world but inaccessible to Harry. The silence becomes a character in itself, mocking Harry with its indifference. By the time he is reunited with the Order, the resentment has already rooted itself deep in his chest. He is not just angry, he is hurt. He has been treated like a child, like a pawn, and this realization festers like a wound. When the confrontation finally comes in Dumbledore's office after the death of Sirius Black, it's not a neat, cinematic moment of quiet reflection or dramatic revelation. It's chaos. Harry trashes the room, knocks over tables, shatters delicate silver instruments. His words are jagged and wild, not crafted for effect, but spilled out of the rawest part of his soul. He is not seeking comfort, he is demanding truth. "I don't care," he roars in the book. "I've had enough, I've seen enough, I want out, I want it to end, I don't care anymore." It is in this moment that Harry stops being a boy. He becomes a soldier who realizes he's fighting in a war without ever having been given the choice to enlist. This explosion matters not just because it's emotionally gripping, it reveals the fault lines in Dumbledore's carefully constructed plans. For all his wisdom and power, Dumbledore made the decision to cut Harry out, to keep him ignorant for what he believed was Harry's own good. But the consequence of that silence is catastrophic. Sirius Black, the closest thing Harry has ever had to a parent, is dead. And in Harry's mind, that death was preventable. If only someone had trusted him with the truth, if only someone had treated him like more than just a weapon against Voldemort. The fury isn't blind, it is directed, justified, and heart-wrenchingly honest. None of this fury is given proper space in the film. Instead, we are offered a quiet scene, with soft lighting and Dumbledore brooding by his desk while Harry stands silently, grief written on his face but no word spoken. It is as though the fire in Harry's chest has been replaced by a whisper. His anger is dulled, the catharsis robbed of its sharpness. The decision to omit his outburst strips away the layers of emotional complexity that define his character in the book. What should have been a turning point in Harry's development is rendered a silent footnote. In the book, this moment also grants Dumbledore his own reckoning. He admits, for the first time, that he has made a grave mistake. He confesses to having distanced himself from Harry out of fear, not for Harry, but of his own feelings toward him. "I cared about you too much," Dumbledore says. He reveals that he saw Harry not just as the boy who lived, but as a boy who had already lost too much, and that made him afraid to cause more pain. This vulnerability from Dumbledore is as rare as it is powerful. It humanizes him, cracks the marble pedestal upon which he had always stood. In hiding the truth, he became the architect of the very tragedy he sought to avoid. That conversation in the book lays the groundwork for the emotional dynamics of the final 2 installments. It sets a precedent. Harry will no longer be a passive recipient of plans made by others. He demands agency, even if it comes at great personal cost. It also transforms his relationship with Dumbledore into one of mutual respect, forged in fire, rather than distant admiration. Harry's grief and anger are not weaknesses, they are signs that he has grown beyond needing protection. He is ready to fight, not because he is unafraid, but because he understands what he is fighting for. The omission of this scene in the film does more than just sanitize the narrative, it dilutes the stakes. Without Harry's furious confrontation, Sirius's death loses its thematic weight. It becomes a sad event, rather than a devastating consequence of secrecy and mistrust. The viewer is left with the impression that Dumbledore remains the omniscient, benevolent mentor, unchallenged and unflawed. But the books never let us believe that. They show us a man burdened by guilt, confronted by the very student he tried to shield. That confrontation is not just dramatic, it is necessary. In this sense, Harry's breakdown is not simply a moment of grief, it is a declaration of independence. By confronting Dumbledore, he reclaims his narrative. He is no longer the boy waiting to be told what to do. He is the young man demanding to know why he's been treated like a child while carrying the weight of prophecy on his shoulders. And that weight, now unbearable, forces the adults around him to finally see what he's become. His rage is his voice, loud, painful, and true. We cannot overlook the cost of removing such a moment. For all the film's successes in visual storytelling and condensed plotlines, the loss of emotional depth is most keenly felt in scenes like these. The audience misses the internal revolution that takes place within Harry. They do not see the shattering of his illusions or the fiery birth of his autonomy. He walks out of Dumbledore's office in the movie the same boy he was when he walked in, but in the book he walks out broken, older, and changed. Moreover, this confrontation ripples through the rest of the book. It informs Harry's decisions, his temper, his increasing disillusionment with the adult world. It becomes clear that the war is not only against Voldemort, it is also against the half-truths and withheld information that have plagued his life since birth. Harry's demands for honesty, for clarity, become the moral axis around which the rest of the story spins. He becomes a symbol of truth in a world built on deception. What makes this scene so unforgettable in the book is not just the emotion, but the courage it takes for Harry to stand up to someone he once revered. In that office, he is not facing Voldemort or a Death Eater. He is facing the man he trusted most. That is a different kind of bravery, one that the films rarely showcase. It's the bravery of speaking truth to power, of demanding answers even when your voice shakes. It's the kind of bravery that defines real leadership. And perhaps that is why its absence is so noticeable. Because in Order of the Phoenix, Harry becomes a leader, not of Dumbledore's army, not of the war, but of his own story. His rage is not petulant, it is righteous. And in releasing it, he claims control over a life that has too often been manipulated by others. In the end, his scream in the book is not just a cry of pain, it is the sound of chains breaking. Number 25, the story of Regulus Black and Kreacher. Regulus Arcturus Black was never meant to be a hero. Born into a pure-blood family steeped in tradition and loyalty to the Dark Lord, he seemed destined to follow in the footsteps of his parents. As the younger brother of Sirius Black, he lived in the shadow of rebellion, his brother scorning everything their family stood for. But Regulus did not rage like Sirius. He watched, he listened. And when the truth revealed itself, it shattered the illusion he had grown up with. Voldemort was not a savior of the wizarding world. He was a monster who consumed others to preserve himself. Regulus discovered this terrible truth not through lectures or battles, but through quiet observation and the whispered suffering of a creature no one cared about, Kreacher, the Black family's house elf. When Voldemort came to borrow Kreacher, the family obeyed. House elves had no voice, no rights, no agency. To them, loyalty was a form of magic, and they obeyed their masters without question. Kreacher was sent with Voldemort to test a cave filled with dark enchantments. There, he was forced to drink a potion from a basin, a cruel liquid that tortured the drinker with pain and hallucinations. When Kreacher begged for mercy, Voldemort ignored him. When the pain consumed Kreacher, Voldemort abandoned him on the lake to die. But Kreacher didn't die. He returned home because Regulus had commanded him to. That moment, the betrayal of Kreacher and his miraculous return, was when Regulus began to change. It was not politics or prophecy that turned Regulus's heart. It was empathy. He saw what Voldemort had done to someone so loyal, so insignificant in the eyes of the world, and realized that if the Dark Lord could torture Kreacher, he could torture anyone. Regulus didn't write speeches. He didn't join the Order. Instead, he devised a plan. He ordered Kreacher to take him back to the cave. He knew the basin must be emptied before the locket Horcrux could be taken, and he knew what that meant. Someone had to drink the poison. Regulus never hesitated. In silence and darkness, he took the pain upon himself. They crossed the lake in a small boat. The cave was full of enchantments, blood magic, illusions, and inferi that waited beneath the water. Regulus gave Kreacher precise instructions. The elf was to obey him and then return home, no matter what happened. Kreacher watched as Regulus drank the potion, his body writhing in agony. The pain was unbearable, but Regulus kept going. He took the Horcrux. He gave Kreacher the fake locket with a note to place inside the basin. And then, as Kreacher disappeared, Regulus collapsed, dragged into the Black Lake by undead hands. He was only 18. Kreacher kept this secret for years. No one asked, no one cared. He was just an old, bitter elf clinging to a house that had long since turned to dust. It was only when Harry Potter showed him kindness that the story came out. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Rowling gives this forgotten narrative the dignity it deserves. The moment is quiet but powerful. Master Regulus was very brave. Yes, 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 Kreacher whispers, tears sliding down his face. For the first time, the trio sees Kreacher not as a nuisance, but as someone who had suffered, someone who remembered love and loss. This was not just character development, this was transformation. Harry begins to see that loyalty cannot be demanded, it must be earned. He treats Kreacher with decency, even kindness. He listens to the story, he shows respect for Regulus's sacrifice. And in return, something extraordinary happens. Kreacher changes. The bitter, resentful house elf becomes a willing ally. He serves meals, follows orders, and even leads the other house elves into battle during the Battle of Hogwarts. Rowling ties this directly to Harry's actions. Kindness becomes a weapon stronger than any spell. But in the films, this entire storyline is reduced to ashes. Kreacher's redemption is barely hinted at. The emotional weight of Regulus's sacrifice is never explored. We are told that a locket must be retrieved, that a Horcrux was hidden, but not who first discovered it. There is no mention of a young man who turned against the darkest wizard of all time from within his own ranks. No recognition of an unsung hero who died alone in a cave to make the world better. The movies robbed the audience of one of the most moving moral arcs in the series. The locket itself, one of Voldemort's most treasured Horcruxes, is a symbol of this omission. In the films, it is just an object to be hunted. In the books, it is a legacy soaked in sacrifice. The note Regulus leaves inside reads, "I have stolen the real Horcrux and intend to destroy it as soon as I can. I face death in the hope that when you meet your match, you will be mortal once more." The power of this message lies not just in the words, but in the knowledge that they come from someone who was supposed to serve Voldemort. Regulus was never supposed to be a traitor, but he chose to be one, and he died for it. This storyline had all the makings of a short, cinematic masterpiece, a tale of a loyal house elf and his master who turned on the very ideals they were raised to worship, a mission into darkness, ending in death, a forgotten warrior who never asked for glory. The emotional depth was rich, the symbolism potent. It would have added layers to the story's theme of sacrifice and the true cost of resistance. It would have given the audience a rare glimpse into how even those on the wrong side can choose redemption, but instead it was clipped and tossed aside. Without this arc, Kreacher remains a caricature in the films. His transformation feels abrupt, unexplained. The audience never gets to see the bond that forms between him and Harry. They miss the moment when Kreacher offers to cook lamb for them, smiling for the first time. They don't hear Harry say, "Thank you, Kreacher," and they don't see what that thank you means. In the books, it is a culmination of understanding, of breaking centuries of magical classism. In the films, it's just skipped. Regulus Black's name is barely spoken in the films. His portrait is a flash in the background. His story is a footnote, but in truth, he was the first to act against Voldemort from within. The first to uncover the Horcrux secret, the first to sacrifice himself for the sake of others. He never got to see the final battle, but it was his actions that set it in motion. When Ron destroys the locket Horcrux with the sword of Gryffindor, it is Regulus who made it possible. His death was not in vain. The tragedy is not only that the films omitted this, it's that the audience never got to feel the moment when everything shifts. When Harry realizes that house elves are not beneath him, when he chooses respect over command, that turning point gave Harry moral authority. It deepened his role as the series' emotional center. The films missed a chance to show how the smallest characters can have the biggest hearts, and how sometimes the bravest person is the one who dies alone, unknown. Regulus Black's story, told through Kreacher's trembling voice, is one of quiet rebellion. It is the antidote to the loud heroism of duels and explosions. It reminds us that war is not just waged on battlefields. It's fought in choices, in loyalty, in hidden acts of courage. Kreacher's tears are not just for Regulus, they are for every moment his story was ignored, every time his name was not remembered. The films gave us dragons and giants, but they failed to give us this. And that failure is more than a missed scene, it's a missed truth. Because Regulus's story was not about magic, it was about conscience, about what it means to turn back even when the cost is your life, about seeing suffering and choosing to end it, about looking evil in the face and saying, "No more." That is not something that needed more screen time. It needed soul, and soul was what Regulus gave when he let the lake take him. As the Inferi pulled him under, he knew no one would sing songs for him. No monuments would bear his name. But he went anyway. Not for glory, not even for revenge, but because someone had to stand between the world and Voldemort. And in the end, it was a boy no one noticed and a creature no one respected who made the first wound in the Dark Lord's armor. That silence, that bravery, deserved more than a passing line. It deserved a spotlight. It deserved tears. And it deserved to be remembered. Number 26, Gryffindor versus Hufflepuff, Quidditch match. On a cold and stormy day at Hogwarts, the Quidditch pitch stood like a stage for a story the films never told. The wind howled through the goalposts and the sky threatened rain, but none of that mattered to the young Gryffindor seeker who took to the skies that afternoon. Harry Potter, already famous for feats most students could only dream of, was about to face not dragons or Death Eaters, but a different kind of challenge, one that tested not his magic, but his resilience. His opponent was not Lord Voldemort or even Draco Malfoy, but Cedric Diggory, the noble and talented seeker from Hufflepuff House. This match, mentioned briefly in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, marked their first true encounter, and what happened in the skies that day was both harrowing and deeply human. Cedric Diggory was not a rival in the way Malfoy was. He was fair, kind, and immensely gifted. The school knew him as a natural athlete, admired by teachers and students alike. Against this backdrop, the Gryffindor-Hufflepuff match was more than a game. It was a contest between two rising stars. Harry, only 14 and burdened with the weight of expectations and prophecy, took to the skies knowing the pressure rested squarely on his shoulders. But what began as a simple game soon transformed into something far darker, when shadows moved among the stands and terror swept across the field. The moment is captured vividly in the book. Harry turned the firebolt sharply to the left and began a long dive, eyes narrowed, seeing the glint of gold, and then he felt it. Cold, the icy breath of despair, the sudden numbness in his limbs. He knew this feeling. The Dementors, or so they appeared, had entered the stadium, an act forbidden and unheard of. As Harry plunged toward the snitch, his strength vanished. He could no longer hear the wind or feel the broom beneath him. Instead, the screaming began. His mother's voice, pleading for mercy, filling his head with unbearable grief. He lost control, and then silence. Harry fell. He didn't remember the ground coming closer or the crowd's horrified gasps. He didn't even remember the impact. What followed was blackness, thick and absolute. When he woke in the hospital wing, he learned that Cedric had caught the snitch, but had insisted on a rematch because Harry had fallen. He didn't think it was fair to win like that, Madame Pomfrey had told him. Cedric's integrity shone brighter than the golden ball in his hand, but the match could not be replayed. The damage was already done. What makes this moment so powerful and so painfully absent from the film is what it reveals about Harry's inner world. The Dementors, creatures who feed on human happiness, didn't merely interrupt a game, they exposed his deepest vulnerabilities. They forced him to relive his parents' deaths over and over again, each time stripping away his defenses. This wasn't Voldemort casting a killing curse or a basilisk slithering through pipes. This was psychological warfare, and Harry lost that round. He fell, not because he wasn't brave, but because he was still a boy carrying grief too heavy for someone his age. And yet, this scene was completely removed from the movie adaptation of Goblet of Fire. Viewers never saw Harry's collapse on the pitch, never heard the screams only he could hear, never witnessed the sheer terror of flying through fog and despair. Instead, Cedric and Harry meet for the first time at the Triwizard Tournament, with no acknowledgement of the battle that preceded it. A match that could have illustrated the cost of trauma, the burden of fame, and the quiet courage needed to get up after a fall, erased with a screenwriter's pen. Even more striking is the revelation that the Dementors were not Dementors at all. Fred and George Weasley later reveal that Draco Malfoy and his friends had dressed in dark robes and masks trying to spook Harry mid-air. What they saw as a prank nearly killed him. The twins were furious, but Harry didn't lash out. He absorbed the humiliation, the pain, the fear, and kept moving forward. It was a moment of transformation. He didn't need a wand or a prophecy to show strength. He simply had to survive and try again. In the film, Harry's fear of Dementors is only shown in his lessons with Professor Lupin. While powerful, those scenes lack the raw, immediate danger of being ambushed mid-flight. There's a difference between a controlled classroom and an open sky with 100 eyes watching. The match, as Rowling wrote it, juxtaposed the thrill of sport with the terror of psychological collapse, reminding us that heroism isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the act of getting up after falling, quite literally, from the sky. The book paints the fall not as a failure but as a step in Harry's journey. "You fell off your broom, Harry," Dumbledore told him quietly. "You were lucky not to be more seriously hurt." But Dumbledore, always more perceptive than he appeared, knew that the physical injury was the lesser wound. What happened that day wasn't about bones or bruises, it was about memory and trauma and the way they stalk us even in moments of triumph. By cutting this scene, the films lose one of the rare glimpses into Harry's real struggle, not against dark magic, but against his own sorrow. What also vanished with this scene was Cedric's earliest act of nobility. Long before he offered to share the Triwizard Cup, Cedric showed the kind of fairness and decency that marked him as a true Hufflepuff. His insistence that the match wasn't a real victory showed who he was at his core. He wasn't just a name carved on a grave. He was a young man who believed in justice, even on the Quidditch pitch. Without this match, his later sacrifice feels less grounded, as if he only became brave at the end. But bravery, as we see in the book, was always a part of him. It also underscored Harry's loneliness. Even surrounded by friends, he carried fears none of them could understand. Hermione and Ron saw the fall, but they couldn't hear the screams. They didn't fall through the cold or wake in the hospital wing with echoes in their chest. The Dementors weren't real that day, but the terror was, and Harry, as usual, had to face it alone. That solitude, that forced maturity, is what made him who he was long before the prophecy said he must fight. The symbolism of broomstick and fall is hard to miss. Harry, the boy who soared, the Golden Seeker, brought down not by an enemy's curse but by his own memories. It's poetic and brutal. His firebolt, the fastest broom in the world, meant nothing in that moment. Not speed, not skill, not fame could save him from what lived inside. And yet the fall wasn't the end. It became a beginning, a lesson. Pain taught him where the danger really lived. Had the film included this moment, the audience might have understood Harry better. Not just as a chosen one or a warrior, but as a fragile soul growing stronger with every invisible wound. Children who face grief, who tremble at night for reasons they can't explain, would have seen themselves in him. They would have seen that being afraid doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. And overcoming that fear, even if only enough to get out of bed the next morning, is a kind of magic no wand can replicate. By skipping the match, the filmmakers also lost a moment of visual contrast. Harry's sleek firebolt against Cedric's skill, the thunderous sky, the trembling crowd. It would have been cinematic gold, but more importantly, it was a moment of depth. Not every scene needs spells or shouting. Sometimes a fall says more than a battle. Sometimes fear in the heart says more than fury on the battlefield. The game wasn't just a game, it was a lesson in courage. The Quidditch match between Gryffindor and Hufflepuff was not about winning or losing. It was about seeing our hero fail, break, and rise again. It was about showing that the darkest moments don't always come with epic music or final confrontation. Sometimes they come in the middle of a storm, on a broomstick, when the sky opens and the past crashes into the present. And that is why its absence from the films feels like more than an omission. It feels like a loss. Number 27, The Ghosts of Hogwarts and the Fat Lady. In the flickering candlelight of Hogwarts, ghosts are not merely spectral ornaments, but echoes of untold stories draped in the fabric of memory and regret. The books gave them breath, strange irony for the dead, and imbued them with longing, peculiar humour, and a fragile authority. Yet the films, in their rush to compress and dazzle, stripped these characters to near invisibility. Nearly Headless Nick, Bloody Baron, the Fat Friar, the Grey Lady, all became phantoms in the truest sense, present yet unseen, known yet unacknowledged. Most tragically, the Fat Lady, guardian of Gryffindor Tower, was robbed of her moment of fear, defiance, and unexpected complexity after Sirius Black's intrusion. The Fat Lady in the books is no simple caricature of a plump woman in pink silk. She is a fixture of Hogwarts, a character with pride, sensitivity, and even a sense of theatre. Her portrait doesn't just swing open on command, it demands a password, a performance, even a little flair. But her most human moment comes in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, when the illusion of safety within the castle shatters. After the attempted break-in by Sirius Black, it is not the suits of armour or magical wards that first react, it is she. The Fat Lady refuses to return to her post, not out of laziness or tantrum, but fear, genuine, paralysing fear. She refused to let them in until Dumbledore had spoken to her very kindly, the book recounts. She had been attacked, her portrait slashed in fury, and she was not ready to pretend it hadn't happened. This small scene reveals something critical. The Fat Lady is not just a painting. She is a soul, one with limits, with trauma. Her absence throws Gryffindor Tower into chaos as students are forced to sleep in the Great Hall, watched over by nervous staff. The security of Hogwarts is shaken not by an alarm or magical explosion, but by the silence left in her frame. In that void hangs the fear of every student. If she is not safe, who is? In contrast, the films reduce this complex event to an afterthought. Yes, there is a moment when the Fat Lady is found hiding behind other paintings, but the emotional depth, the violation she endured, the rupture in her purpose is missing. She becomes comic relief, a shrill soprano hiding among still lifes. The image lingers for a moment, then disappears. No chaos, no vulnerability, no frightened students whispering about the torn canvas, just another brushstroke on the background. Nearly Headless Nick, too, is hollowed in the cinematic retelling. In the books, he is more than a ghostly punchline with a dangling head. He is a bridge between the living and the dead, an unsettling reminder that death at Hogwarts is not always an escape, but sometimes a choice. In Order of the Phoenix, after the death of Sirius, Harry is desperate, numb, and searching for meaning. He asks Nick, the unthinkable, could Sirius return as a ghost? The answer is no, and in that no is buried a truth too large for the screen. Nick explains, not without sorrow, that only witches and wizards afraid of death, those who cling to life and fear what lies beyond, become ghosts. I was afraid of death, he admits. I chose to remain behind. I sometimes wonder whether I oughtn't to have. Well, that is neither here nor there. In fact, I am neither here nor there. This is not comic relief. This is metaphysics wrapped in melancholy. The line blurs between existence and non-existence, between choice and consequence. It's a moment that gives Nick more dimension than many living characters. But the films miss it entirely. There is no conversation, no philosophy, no flicker of post-mortem honesty. The ghosts of Hogwarts are not uniform. They are reflections of their houses, their regrets, their unfinished business. The Bloody Baron, Slytherin's silent guardian, is wrapped in silver chains, forever stained with blood. He's not simply a terrifying figure who floats menacingly. He is the embodiment of guilt. In the final revelation of Deathly Hallows, we learn that he murdered the Grey Lady, Helena Ravenclaw, out of love and jealousy, and then, stricken with remorse, took his own life. His silence is not stoicism, but penance. None of this survives in the films. The Grey Lady herself, Rowena Ravenclaw's daughter, is relegated to a few haunting words on screen. But in the book, her tale is central to Voldemort's downfall. It is she who reveals the secret of the lost diadem, the final Horcrux, hidden for centuries. Her bitterness, her shame, her need to be understood, all swirl through her ghostly form. "I stole the diadem," she confesses to Harry. "I sought to make myself cleverer, more important than my mother. I ran away with it." The ghost who once glided silently through corridors becomes a key player in the fate of the wizarding world. Yet, on screen, she is a whisper, a flicker, a shadow. Even the Fat Friar, gentle and forgiving, a counterweight to the darker legacies of his fellow ghosts, never finds his voice in the adaptations. He is there, floating and smiling, but never speaking. The book hints that he was executed by the Church for using magic to cure the sick, an early, bitter injustice that haunts the foundation of Hogwarts itself. But the films never grant him more than a passing glance. The viewer is left unaware that each house ghost is a mirror of values, mistakes, and lessons. The most haunting scene with ghosts, though, may be Nearly Headless Nick's Death Day party in Chamber of Secrets. It is grotesque, unsettling, yet deeply poignant. The food is mouldy and translucent, the air is freezing, and the music screeches off-key. Ghosts glide through tables, moaning softly or muttering to each other, reminiscing about the moment they died. It is a parody of life, a refusal to move on. Nick throws the party to be seen to mark the 300th anniversary of his death, but it is painfully clear no one truly wants to be there, not even him. This scene, so bizarre and tender, was entirely cut from the films. Perhaps it was deemed too strange, too slow, or too dark. But it captured something crucial about Rowling's world, that the magical is never far from the tragic, that whimsy and sorrow often walk hand in hand. Ghosts are not cute accessories. They are memory, trauma, punishment. The Death Day party revealed that even in the afterlife, one can feel forgotten. There is a moment in the books when Dumbledore speaks of death not as an end, but as the next great adventure. The ghosts of Hogwarts challenge that. They linger in doorways, in portraits, in moonlit corridors, not adventuring, but trapped, by fear, by guilt, by indecision. They are testimonies to what it means to be human, even after the body is gone. In erasing their complexity, the films lose part of Hogwarts itself.